All right, welcome back to the listener's commentary on the book of Genesis. In this recording, we are going to be looking at Genesis 34 through 36. And really what I want to do is just provide an overview and some tips or guidelines, cultural and background and narrative-wise, that'll help you read these three chapters effectively. And these three chapters really serve to wrap up the story of Isaac's descendants and transition to the story of Jacob's descendants. So this is like the wrap-up of the Toledot of Isaac. And we've said multiple times that word Toledot in Hebrew refers to the generations of, the descendants or offspring of. And so these three chapters wrap up Isaac's Toledot, his story of his offspring, but they also transition to Jacob's descendants by focusing on a story about his daughter and his sons. And so this section moves the story of Genesis forward in that way. So let me just give you a little overview of these three chapters. Chapter 34 is really a tragic story, a kind of a sad and awful story of something that happens to Jacob's daughter, Dinah, how there is a man, a Canaanite, living in the land who sexually assaults her, and then the fallout from that. So that's chapter 34. A little more on that in a second. That leads to Jacob and his household really having to leave the area they were living in because of the trouble that's been stirred up there. And so chapter 35 focuses on Jacob moving to a different part, but in moving to a different part, he moves to Bethel, where God had appeared to him way back when he was fleeing from Esau. And then chapter 35 is going to focus on what happens there and how God responds to that. And then chapter 36 is going to be the wrap-up of Isaac's line by giving us the descendants of Esau, the death of Isaac, as the preparation for then moving into chapter 37 and the focus specifically on Jacob's Toledot, or a section of stories about his offspring, his kids. So in a lot of ways, this section is not unimportant, but it's transitional as we kind of wrap up Isaac and move towards Jacob. And as we have seen repeatedly in the book of Genesis, particularly since chapter 12, and the call of Abraham, we see God continuing to fulfill his promise to Abraham in spite of all the shortcomings of Abraham's family, in spite of all the obstacles that Abraham's family endures in the land, in spite of all the things that Abraham's family does that could be problems to hindering the promise moving forward. And so these three chapters illustrate that same theme once again over and over. And we should recognize that it's been roughly 2 centuries since chapter 12. So it's been a long time, and the promise is still going forward. In fact, by the time we get to these 3 chapters, Abraham's descendants are many, and they are actually growing and thriving in the land that God promised to them. All of that in spite of themselves and in spite of social and other obstacles. And that's what we get here. So, chapter 34. Here is the situation in chapter 34. Let me read the first few verses that set up the scene, and then we'll kind of explain a few things, give some summary that'll help you read the rest of the chapter well. So, Genesis 34, verses 1 through 4 reads, "Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob." Mentioned in earlier chapters that after Leah had all these sons, she finally had a daughter. Dinah is that daughter. Dinah, went out to visit the daughters of the land. She went out literally to see. She wanted to just go look over the land and meet some of the other Canaanite women, the young gals who lived in the region where she was living in her father's household. So she goes out to visit the daughters of the land when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land. So Hamor, Shechem's dad, is the chieftain. He is the local sheik, if you will, in that region, in that little place where they're living. And Shechem saw Dinah, and he took her and lay with her and sexually assaulted her. Now, the term sometimes is translated rape, and it's not totally clear. It really depends on the context, and we don't have enough data here whether Dinah was willing or whether she wasn't. It doesn't really matter in their cultural context. We'll explain more about that in just a second. But he took her and he sexually assaulted her. Now, he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem then speaks to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife." All right, that's the setup for what happens in chapter 34. And what we need to understand is, in the ancient world, we have to keep in mind that marriages were arranged. You didn't get to just choose who you wanted to marry. Marriages were arranged. And if there was a young man and a young woman, or even just a young man who wanted to marry a particular young woman, and his parents wouldn't arrange it, one of the ways around that was exactly what happens here. Have sex with her, and that would force the family basically into arranging the marriage. This is so much an issue in the ancient world, where you see in the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy, when God finally gives the Mosaic law, there's actually laws, instructions given for what to do in these kinds of cases where this happens. And so that's what's going on here. Shechem sees Dinah, is attracted to her, wishes that he could marry her. He isn't sure that the family, his dad, is going to go for that. So he just takes matters into his own hand and is trying to then use that as leverage to force his father into arranging a marriage with Dinah. And we also need to remember that marriages in the ancient Near East, in the ancient world, were as much of a matter of social standing and social welfare and economics as they were a matter of love and all of that. So all of that social situation lies behind what Shechem does to Dinah. And then the rest of chapter 34 tells the outcome of all of this. So Shechem wants to marry Dinah. Word gets back to Jacob and Jacob's sons. And Shechem's dad, Hamor, comes to Jacob to try to arrange a marriage between Dinah and Shechem. And Jacob's sons, Dinah's brothers, are deeply disturbed and bothered by this. It's a disgraceful thing. It shouldn't have been done, bringing shame on the family, shame on Dinah. It is wrong. And so Hamar's trying to negotiate this marriage for his son. And this marriage would be, it's really another threat to the line of promise. If they intermarry, then that, in a lot of ways, will eliminate or water down the line of promise. So it's another threat to the promise as well as a shameful thing to the family. And so Shechem's there trying to negotiate this with his father. They're trying to work this whole thing out. And he says, look, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I will give whatever bride gift you want me to give. And for them, intermarriage makes sense because Jacob's a growing household. He's a powerful clan living in their region. So he goes and talks to the leaders now of the city at the city gate. And we have to remember that the city gates, village gates, were where official business was dealt with. And so all of this is now becoming an official matter in the region. So here's what happens. Jacob's sons decide, no, this is not going to happen, but they're subversive about this. And so they basically say, here's the nature of the bride price we need, that our family has this tradition, and it's the mark of our family called circumcision. Way back, Genesis 17, right? The sign of the covenant with Abraham been passed on in the family. So there's no way that you can marry our daughter when you're uncircumcised, so you got to get circumcised. All right, Shechem and Hamor are willing to go for it. They circumcise all the men in the little village there. And agree to do that. And then Dinah's two brothers wait for a couple days, and when all the men are pretty incapacitated because of just recently being circumcised, they go in with their sword and they kill every male in the city. They killed Hamor, the chieftain, and they killed his son Shechem. This was their way of bringing honor back to their family and to their sister. This was a honor killing and a form of revenge. And then Jacob is like, what have you done? Now you're going to make trouble for us in this whole region. But Dinah's brothers say, well, they shouldn't treat our sister like a prostitute, because in the ancient world, only a prostitute was the kind of person who had like the right to their own sexuality as a female to choose who to give it with. And the idea is treating someone like a prostitute would mean she has no family, she has no men to protect her, and Shechem treated our sister that way. And so this is not only a form of revenge, it's also an honor killing. So God once again steps in to protect the family line for the sake of the promise in spite of this horrendous and awful situation. So in chapter 35, God tells Jacob, just arise, move to Bethel, where I appeared to you. And so Jacob did. He moves to Bethel. He makes an altar there at God's instruction. He worships the Lord there at Bethel. And you can read chapter 35 and some of the details there. But here's what happens that's really central in chapter 35 that happened at Bethel. Verse 9 of chapter 35, then God appeared to Jacob again after he had come from Paddan Aram, and he blessed him. And so Bethel is the place when Jacob was fleeing from Esau, that God appeared to him in the vision of the ladder or the stairs with the angels going up and down and God at the top. Well, now God appears to him again there at Bethel, and God appears to him and says to him, 35:10, your name is Jacob, but you're no longer going to be called Jacob. Israel shall be your name. So he called him Israel. And this is God restating the name change, which includes the identity change. And then God also said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. Hear the echo, if you will, of the creation account. A nation and a multitude of nations shall come forth from you, and kings shall come from you. And the land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. So right here in this moment, in spite of everything that's gone on recently as well as historically, God reaffirms the promise to Jacob. This is who you are, Israel, and this is what I intend to do for you. Not because of anything of yourself, but because of who I am and the promise I've made. And so God reaffirms that promise. Jacob sets up a memorial stone there at Bethel in honor of God, poured a drink offering on it, and once again reaffirmed, this place is Bethel. This is the house of God. That's what Bethel means. And then you get this little story at the end of chapter 35 where they're now leaving Bethel and they're on their way to Hebron, which has been a traditional place. It's further to the south where Isaac's family has lived and shepherded their flocks and all that down towards Hebron. So they're on their way there. Rachel's pregnant with her second child, and she goes into labor on the way. It's a complicated delivery, and Rachel dies during labor, and she named him as he was born before she died, Ben-Omi, the son of my suffering, but Jacob names him Benjamin. And this is where the 12th son of Jacob is born. And this is the event that's being recalled in the gospel story about all the killing of the little boys in Bethlehem. It's recalling this moment in history by quoting a passage from Jeremiah that looks back at this moment. This is the event. Then chapter 35 wraps up with just an attempt by Reuben to seize leadership over the family, recognizing that Isaac is dying, recognizing that he's the firstborn of Jacob. And so he goes and sleeps with Jacob's concubine Bilhah, Rachel's servant, And so it's not merely a moment of lust. It looks like that from our cultural context, but this is an act of selfish ambition. As the firstborn, he's staking his claim to even Rachel's portion of the family by means of Rachel's servant. That's what Reuben is doing. So you get that weird little moment here in Genesis. Then you get a listing of the 12 sons of Jacob after that. And then finally, chapter 35 wraps up with the death of Isaac. And so it says in verse 28, "Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. Then Isaac breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him." And so we've wrapped up the Toledot of Isaac with that moment, and the story has focused on his two sons, Jacob and Esau, and what we then get in chapter 36 is the Toledot, if you will, of Esau, where it's just a summary, a listing of all the descendants of Esau. That's what chapter 36 is listing off all the sons of Esau, which becomes the nation of Edom. That is who the Edomites are. They are descendants of Esau. And so you get this huge listing of names in chapter 36, and then beginning in chapter 37, what you'll end up getting is the Toledot of Jacob. Now let's focus on Jacob's family line. And so that's Genesis 34 through 36. Just a couple theological reflections. The main one, the theme we keep hitting over and over again, is that God continues to fulfill his promise. There are now trees named by Jacob. There are cities named by Jacob. There are altars in the land. There are wells we've seen dug by Abraham and then by Isaac. There are memorial stones. There are graves in the land. And so the land itself is becoming part of their family history. And the family continues to grow and expand with all these descendants and all these offspring. And we get here listed the 12 sons of Jacob, which shows God's faithfulness to not only Abraham, but to Isaac and now to Jacob. And so all of this growth, God continuing to fulfill his promise in spite of obstacles and threats and character flaws and threats from within and threats from without, right? God is faithful to his covenant promises, sometimes, usually, in spite of his people. And the other important theological reflection out of this little section is that God has won over Jacob. We didn't really mention it when we gave the quick overview through the chapter, but Jacob is now clearly loyal to Yahweh. We see him there in chapter 35, setting up the memorial stone, worshiping Yahweh, God, the one true God of Israel, appearing to him and reaffirming his promise to him. Well, what also happens in that context in chapter 35 that demonstrates Jacob's absolute loyalty to Yahweh is he has all the people in his household, servants and employees and whatever else it is, everyone who's associated with his household has to get rid of any little family idols, household gods they have. So they have to get rid of all images of other gods, and they bury them. They get rid of earrings and bracelets that maybe are reminders of their loyalty and promises they've made to other gods. They have to take all those off, and they bury all of those things. Why? Because God has won over Jacob. And God is now his God fully and completely. He is the God of this family. And so we get this line of promise that becomes the genealogy of Jesus with all the threats, all the obstacles, all the character flaws, and yet God continues to work with them and work on them to carry his promise forward. All right, thanks for tuning in to the Listener's Commentary on the book of Genesis. The Listener's Commentary is a listener-supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching project that's only possible by the generosity of dozens and dozens of people just like you. So thanks a ton for your support. And if you have been encouraged, challenged, built up by this ministry, could I invite you to prayerfully consider joining the team of supporters? You can do that by going to listenerscommentary.com, clicking the Give button. It'll redirect you to a page, my page at World Family Mission, a registered nonprofit, where you can put in a dollar amount. If you want to make it monthly, click a little box that says make this monthly. Or you could also there at listenerscommentary.com just sign up for the study hub. And choose a dollar amount there, and that is another great way to support this ministry as well. Thanks a ton for your support.